Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Sparks, president of the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art, and it is truly an honor to welcome you here this afternoon to this great hall. The Cooper Union is among the nation's very best colleges for universities for students preparing for careers in art, architecture, and engineering, and importantly, for those who are committed to questioning the status quo, to pushing boundaries, to advancing a better world. Since the very beginning, more than 160 years ago, this great hall has been central to that mission. It is a landmark for public dialogue and social progress, a place where influential voices, creative voices, inventive voices address the critical issues and challenges facing our city, our nation, and society at large. And across those many years, so many of those voices have belonged to incredible women. All of the women you see on the screen behind me, or used to see on the screen behind me, and so many more have stood on this very stage. They came here to organize, educate, and inspire, to lead change and present a path forward. Among them were abolitionists, suffragists, labor organizers, civil rights leaders, social activists, artists, advocates, political leaders, scientists, and performers. A veritable who's who of women trailblazers. You can learn more about some of them in your program, and I also invite you to explore our incredible digital archive, Voices from the Great Hall. There's a QR code in your program that opens the archive for you, and once you're there, you can search nearly 3,000 entries to hear recordings and view documents related to the many great women who have addressed New York City audiences in this very special place. I want to express my deepest thanks to the board and staff of the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation, hi Catherine, for sharing our vision for celebrating the history of the Great Hall and for making both the archive and a new series of events, including the programs today, possible. We are so very grateful for the role that the foundation plays in both preserving and bringing to life the rich history of New York and celebrating the Great Hall as an important New York treasure. Also supporting our programs today are the Ciafone and Argento family, Debbie and Scott Reckler and Reckler Philanthropy, Brown and Weinraub, the Harrington Agency, Trilon Graphics, the Morrison and Forrester Foundation, and One Source Production. Our thanks goes to all of the donors who allow us to carry forward the Cooper Union's commitment to making education, culture, and civic discourse accessible to all. My thanks also to the very nimble Cooper Union team, from our facilities to our production staffs who have prepared today's programming and this great hall space for all of us to enjoy and experience together. They are quite a force. And my thanks to you too. Whether you have attended our public programs before or are joining us for the first time, we are absolutely delighted that you have chosen to spend your afternoon with us on this remarkable day in celebration of Women's History Month right here in the Great Hall. I should note this is only part one of our celebration today, and if you've not yet reserved your ticket for the very special performances here this evening, there's still time for you to do that and to see and hear from more incredible women, including the New York City Ballet's principal dancer Tyler Peck, Grammy Award winners Lisa Fisher and Melissa Manchester, Broadway's Melissa Errico, and our own alumna and comedian Alice Wetterland, and several other exciting performers. So you can find tickets online by visiting our homepage, cooper.edu. And now for our extraordinary guests. What do you say about an icon? Gloria Steinem has traveled the world as an organizer, lecturer, author, journalist, and spokeswoman on issues of equality and justice. She has been one of the most visible and passionate leaders of the women's rights movement since the 1960s. She co-founded the National Women's Political Caucus, the Ms. Foundation for Women, the Free to Be Foundation, and the Women's Media Center, among other entities. And in 2013, President Barack Obama, another Great Hall speaker, presented her with his Presidential Medal of Freedom. Joining Gloria for today's conversation is scholar, activist, and author Salamishah Tillet. Salamishah won the Pulitzer Prize in 2022 for her work as contributing critic at large for the New York Times. She is the Henry Rutgers Professor of Africana Studies and Creative Writing at Rutgers University, Newark, and co-founder, along with her sister Scheherazade Tillet, of A Long Walk Home, a nonprofit that empowers young people to use art to end violence against all girls and women. These two have so much to talk through today, given all that's at stake for women and women's empowerment. We'll have time at the end to take some of your questions from the audience, so get those ready. But first, let me ask you to join me one more time in welcoming, indeed, two great women, Gloria Steinem and Salamishah Tillet.
So thank you so much, Laura, for that really generous introduction. Thank you, Gloria, for being Gloria Steinem, and for being such a generous mentor and spirit in this world. So we're gonna have a conversation. This is my fourth time doing a conversation with you. One is in print, and this is the third one that we've done on stage. So we're gonna continue the conversations that we've had in private, kind of staged it for you all publicly, and then invite you in to our moment together at the end. Though Gloria probably will break form and talk to you directly, because that's her style. So this is your third time being here in this great, great hall, correct?
Yes, I feel that Lincoln and all the other people who have been right. Very hard to live up to this space.
Yes, Lincoln and Gloria Steinem. So can we play? Sure. So we have, as the young people today say, that we have receipts of your time here, but we have video clips of Gloria. So we're gonna intersperse those in our conversation. So if we can play clip number 1.
And nobody asked me what these clips should be. I just want to say.
Yes, no one asked you what the clip.
It's very important that we gather together in groups like this, because we otherwise sit alone and look at the television or read the newspaper and often feel that we alone share particular values and concerns. Only by sending out a signal like this and making a temporary institution in rooms like we see tonight are we able really to find out that we are not alone.
So one of the most foundational aspects of your practice is the talking circle. And in your book, My Life on the Road, you define it as groups in which anyone may speak in turn, everyone must listen, and consensus is more important than time. And then the play on you, the second act of it was a talking circle. So I thought this was an interesting clip in relationship to this idea of this entire space being a talking circle, and why has that been so foundational for you, if you could define it for other people here. And the big question is, how does the talking circle mirror or model democracy and feminism for you?
In the beginning of the women's movement, I think we thought we had invented the talking circle. And we discovered, of course, that the talking circle was the basis of Native American culture, that the whole principle was that each person had a time to speak, and while others listened. In fact, there was a talking stick often that was passed from one person to the next. So I think we were having the experience of reinventing the history that had been denied to us. You know, ever since the first Europeans showed up on these shores, we have not really fully acknowledged the advanced civilizations that were already here, and in a way, the Talking Circle is just one example of that.
And then I know why was it important in terms of the play to kind of have that as, you know, essential to how we see your life?
Well, anything that's in a circle is better than anything that's in a hierarchy. Have you ever noticed that?
So we're in a semicircle here.
Right. And I do think that we have to, or we're helped by symbolizing or revivifying democratic symbols while we are speaking. It makes a big difference, I've found, just to sit at a round table instead of at, you know, a big kind of hierarchical boardroom table. It's, I mean, revolutions are kind of like trees. You know, they're not built from the top down, they're built from the bottom up. So just remembering that, and that everything we do matters, is really very, very helpful. Otherwise, it seems impossible, you know, if we're thinking of the end result we want. So it's really very helpful, I find, to think of this as a tree, and to think of this event as part of that tree. I mean, I hope that, I know you had to stand in line. I feel bad about that. You were, right. But I hope that you have already met some people you didn't know before, right? And that before you leave, you can look around and see, you know, people you don't know, and say what you care about and what you're doing. And that will organically change tomorrow and the next day and the next, because you were here and because you're each unique and part of a circle.
So I had the honor of interviewing you for the Kindle singles so there was a series of books, like ebooks, that did, you know, where someone would interview someone. And so I know your biography pretty well, but
Good, because at my age, I'm going to have a T-shirt made that says, at my age, remembering something right away is as good as an orgasm.
okay. So
See, I think it would sell, right?
Well, now you've made, like, memory loss a really pleasurable, or memory, like, something to look forward to, because it's as good as an orgasm. So thank you for that, if anything. So you're from Ohio, Toledo, Ohio. You came to New York. You studied at Smith. You wrote for really an amazing expose essay on being a Playboy bunny for Show magazine. Then you wrote about your experience with abortions and for New York Magazine. And then you founded Ms. Magazine, and you know, she's the most famous feminist ever. So I just want to give a quick bio there. But when did you realize? So these are two questions, and maybe they're one and the same, but for me they're different. So when did you go back and you look at your life and you look at that moment and you knew you were a feminist? And then when did you start using the term feminist for yourself? And they may be one and the same, but they may not be.
I think we said women's liberationist first, because it sounded stronger. Feminist sounded too much like feminine. Now that I'm not saying that continued, but anyway. But I think we did start out saying women's liberation. But for a lot of us, you know, we had been active in the great movements that we hope continue, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, which we hope continues as anti-war in general. And but we could see that even within those admirable movements that we loved, women were not actually equal. And, you know, I remember going to the big civil rights march in Washington. What year was that? What everybody, anyway.
63.
It was during the Kennedy administration. You know, it was great, and we were glad to be there, and we were giving out flyers and working and so on. And yet, the only woman who was on stage was singing, not speaking. And there was a woman named Mrs. Green who gave me the courage somehow to realize that that was not okay, because she pointed it out. I was standing next to her, and she said, but we're still only singing. So we realized that no matter how much we loved and continue to love those great movements, that there needed also to be a women's movement, a feminist movement, a women's liberation movement, whatever you want to call it.
And then when you think about your own childhood, because I know you often talk about your dad and your mom as instilling certain values, and even the kind of religious upbringing that you had, or not, the type of religion that you grew up in, that they instilled a particular set of values that you may not have called yourself a feminist, but that there was an awakening or a consciousness that the world was unjust as a child. So I was just curious if you want to...
Yes, I think my father had a little summer resort in southern Michigan, and that meant that the bands of the era came through in buses, you know, to dance, the dance bands, which were at the time, it's in my memory anyway, they were either all white bands or all black bands. There was no restaurant for miles around, so my mother cooked for them. So somehow it was helpful, I think, to grow up with these crazy band members, you know, so around our dining room table. And, you know, I remember asking my mother why it was that people came in different colors, and she said, like flowers. Is that not a great answer? Of course. People, just like flowers, come in different colors, right?
Well, thank you for that. Can we play the next clip, please?
Though I must tell you, it is not the year of the woman. It won't be the year of the woman until we have half of the House, half of the Senate, a president once in a while. And until men are caring for children in the house as much as women are.
So I had the fortune, Gloria doesn't remember this, but this is just because you're such an avid fundraiser and activist. But I was a senior in high school, and I did an internship at NOW right before I graduated. And so worked on this congressional campaign. There was a fundraiser in Montclair, New Jersey, and you were the star of the evening. And so that was the year of so-called Year of the Woman, when there was an unprecedented number of women voted into office right after and in response to Anita Hill coming forward with allegations of sexual harassment against Clarence Thomas. And so you point out there that, you know, that wasn't the Year of the Woman, that there are these markers, there are these metrics that we can use to define equality. And then I was thinking, like, it's interesting to hear this or watch this video now, because we did have, you know, in 2018, the midterm elections, again, in response to the Women's March and Trump's presidency, there was an unprecedented number of women, much more so than even in '92, that came into office. So, and now we have a woman, Vice President Kamala Harris is the first woman, the first African American, the first Asian American to reach this highest level. And yet we still have Dobbs. And so I wanted you to talk about the increasing visibility of women in elected office and the retrenchment or the denial of freedoms. Like, these two things are going on at the same time. And how do you see these collisions happening, or why do you think we have more visibility, more access, and at the same time we have a denial of these reproductive, and maybe they're cause and effect, or maybe?
Well, I think it's so rare to see a woman in power, and especially women of color in power, that when there's one there, there's a kind of tendency of the society to say, that's it, you know, right. And that began to happen with Shirley Chisholm. How many people here remember that she ran for the presidency of the United States. She was on the ballot in 14 states. I and many others ran as her delegate. Of course, we didn't win, but, you know.
And you were her budget person, or?
I don't know. I wrote a speech for her, which was the high point of my life, right? But I suppose that is the way change happens, because that's the way consciousness change. If we think of the presidency, of course, I'm just so glad that Trump is no longer there that I can't even begin.
Is this wood? No, it's not wood. Knock on wood.
Wood, right. But think how different it might have been if not only Barack Obama was the president, but also Hillary Clinton was the president. And so, you know, clearly we have a long way to go before we actually get to democracy. But the exciting thing is that we can create a microcosm of it, as we are beginning to do right here in this hall, and that normalizes it, and it makes us know that we can speak out, that we can do whatever that we were not supposed to. Oh yes, and that actually men can raise children as much as women. That's very important to have democracy in the household, because that's how we know what it looks like, you know, when we're growing up. So things are changing gradually. I hope that there are a lot of people in this room who are way more impatient than I am, because, you know, you get a kind of terminal gratitude because you remember when it was worse, right? So we need younger people who are mad as hell. Thank you very much. But I do think we focus so much on public life and who is in political power or business power, or whatever it is, that we forget that it starts in the home. And until the family is democratic, and men are raising children as much as women, and women are as active outside the home as men are. And it's crucial for men too, because how we learn to empathize and pay attention to detail and all of that is raising little children. So it's helpful for boys and men to learn that.
All right, this is a complete side note, but in terms of like progress, over the holidays, I was telling you about Seneca, Santa Claus, and Santa Claus wrote a note acknowledging Ms. Claus, and my 10-year-old was really like upset that Ms. Claus doesn't have a voice. And why doesn't she speak for herself? Why doesn't she get to go on the sleigh? And then and it was like a heated debate in my household. And so I told this to Gloria, and Gloria's like, Ms. Claus? Like, we didn't even have Ms. Claus. So, progress, I suppose. Well, this brings us to, I remember seeing you right after the 2020 election. I think we were in California at the Makers Conference, and you said to me and my friend Charisse, because we were like so devastated and so despondent, and you said, but this is the first time that we're in the majority, right? And so, and in your lifetime, and then in our lifetime, and that note of optimism kind of always stayed with me, because it made me think, okay, yeah, we're in the numerical majority, even if we felt like, well, the election was what it was. I was curious, how does that optimism help you, or can you help us in these times when we see, again, these vicious attacks on racial progress, sexuality, women's rights, all of these things are happening, and they're ongoing, but they're
abortion,
vicious.
Abortion.
Abortion.
You know, right.
So what's the optimism that you can give us? Is there anything? Can you help us today?
Well, I would just remind us that you have to imagine something before it will happen. So if you're not optimistic, you've given up. And you know, that's why we need each other. That's what movements are about. We're communal animals. We can't do it alone. But movements help us to create together the optimism that we could not maintain by ourselves. And that is the first step toward achieving it, like a tree. It's not easy if we totally look at the television, only at the television, even though it's improved somewhat in the or if we are the only one in our group or our family. So by all means, seek out people who share your dreams and your optimism, because that is the first step towards making it real.
So what inspires you about feminism today? What troubles you about how people see feminism today? So those are the two, and then I have a follow-up.
Oh, well, how long do we have?
And what surprises you? So surprises you, excites you, troubles you. You can do it in whatever order you want.
Well, what surprises me in a way is that we have survived, even though we have had Trump as the worst president that this country has ever seen. I think especially here in New York, where we voted 96% against him. We were shocked, right? But I hope that we understand that that's sort of the way progress is made. It isn't step forward, it's step forward and a little bit back and step forward more and a little bit back again, because there is opposition. You know, there are people who feel that it's against nature, against God, against I don't know what, you know, the economy, cheap labor, you know, to have movements of revolution that say that sex and race are way secondary to our individual uniqueness as human beings.
What inspires you? Is that also part
Well,
of the
you inspire me.
Okay. Well, thank you.
No, she does, right. I mean, she took on the New York Times. I never did that.
I didn't take on the New York Times. Thank you. And then what troubles you? Or maybe even how it's perceived, I guess, if it's not the movement itself.
I guess what troubles me most in various forms is that we behave as if change comes from up there, that it's only going to be in Washington or it's only going to be at the top of whatever hierarchy we are in, and that is disempowering for openers. And it neglects the truth, which I do think that change is like a tree, that it grows from the bottom up. So whatever we can change in our own lives, whether it is being a family in which both, if there is a mother and a father, both mother and a father take care of the infants and little children in the same way, and both are active in the world outside the house in the same way. That is a microcosm of revolution that is the single most powerful. It is the root of it. Nothing can take that away.
Thank you. And it's going to echo from this clip that we will see, what you just said.
I set out to talk about self-esteem, that despised, dreaded word, which is so often called selfish and self-indulgent, especially by people who depend on our self-sacrifice. And in fact, I think we are recognizing more and more that the systems around us based on race and sex and class and sexuality and ability and all of the kinds of hierarchies we see really govern us, not just by the kinds of slavery and controls that were the case when Abraham Lincoln spoke at this podium, but by internal slavery and controls that steal away our self-esteem, our self-authority, so that we will obey the authority of those external systems. And so, in fact, self-esteem is truly the root of revolution. and is truly very radical. And I was thinking about it tonight as I prepared to come here, thinking about what the connections are, in fact, between self-esteem and democracy, between our sense of empowerment and the power structures in which we live.
I love that.
It's very weird, I have to say, to see one's former self. And even more weird to realize I'm still saying some of the same.
I know, that happens to me. I go back to like my college. I used to write for the feminist newspaper and the black newspaper in college. I go back and I'm like, I had a movie review that I had for the black newspaper, and then I used to write these like feminist pop culture essays. I'm like the same person, so I'm like, have I changed or have I not? You know, so yes, I could imagine.
But to be fair, or to be, I don't know what, we do have to keep saying what's important, or saying the same things over and over again. You can't expect to just say it once, even if you write it, and have it have an impact.
Yeah, because the structures that the inequality that we're talking about is still ongoing, so it's true. But it is, so I love this, though, because I was really, I mean, this idea of self-esteem as the basis of revolution, and thinking about the kind of consciousness-raising sessions from the 1970s, whether it was women's liberation movement or feminist movement or the Black Panther Party, like going in communities and talking and having this notion of like the mind has to be free in order to actually be free physically and be free politically. So I really was like, both loved it, and I was also like, oh yeah, like it reminds me of a moment of organizing. And so one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, though, is as an organizer, if self-esteem is the kind of basis of revolution and is the foundation for democracy, I actually wanted to talk about moments of self-doubt. And you and I met in 2009, after a period that you talked about publicly and privately as being one of the most misunderstood moments when you wrote the op-ed in support of Hillary Clinton, and it was seen as this really divisive moment, even though that was not your intent. And so to me, that anxiety always struck me as like an organizer's anxiety, being misunderstood, the message not being received the way that you intended it. And so I don't know if you want to talk about that moment or another moment in which you had self-doubt about your role in the movement, about the movement itself, and how you work through that. Because I think it's the kind of counterpoint to like the self-esteem, but also it's the way one strengthens themselves in order to feel confident. And if that's the basis of revolution, then when's the moment? How you work through your own moments of self-doubt? And
I think being misunderstood is really right up there next to physical pain and other, real suffering, because it makes you feel as if nothing you do matters. And it takes away your agency and your optimism. And part of what a movement is about is it is made up of groups of people who are meeting at their workplace or in their living rooms or in the fields or wherever, who support each other and understand each other and give you a reality check and give you the strength to continue. If I've learned anything, it's that nobody can do it by ourselves. Nobody. And to strive to have support wherever it comes from. And to just talk to people that you're not supposed to talk to. I remember saying that to myself and thinking, okay, when I leave my door, I'm going to talk to whoever it is I see first, right? And so I left my door, and the post office guy, the postman, was the first person I saw. And so I talked to him, and he turned out to be the Democratic leader of Queens, where he I mean, just try it.
So then, and are there any other, I mean, because, you know, for people who've seen the film on your life or the documentary on your life or the play on your life, there are these moments when you, in the early days of your feminist organizing, even here in New York, there were these hierarchies within the feminist movement, women's liberation movement, that created tension between people. And I was just curious, like, you know, how, like, for young organizers in the room who may, or veteran organizers, like, just how did you work? Is there a particular moment where you felt like you were misunderstood, and how did you work through that? Is it creating a private talking circle?
Well, I think for me it was the fact that we had started Ms. Magazine, and it was the only.
That,
and it was the only. There were many feminist magazines around the country and publications, but this was the only national one that was on the newsstands. So we had enormous pressure and resentment and focus, and you know it was difficult, but it caused us to just keep inventing ways of changing. I mean, we invited anybody who was in New York to come to our editorial meetings. Women from other countries came. This was not so great for putting out a magazine, but it was great for the movement. And I was wandering around the country speaking with, I mean, I became a writer, so I didn't have to talk, what can I tell you? And therefore, I couldn't do it by myself. So Flo Kennedy, do you remember the great Florence Kennedy? We traveled together, and she was 100% fearless. I remember we were standing on stage, you know, like we're on stage, and some guy got up in the back of the room and said accusingly, "Are you lesbians?" And Flo said the perfect thing, which is, "Are you our alternative?" So it didn't pay the question, the honor of answering it, but it made everybody laugh, like you did. And you know, he was completely defeated, right? And it taught me, among other things, the value of laughter. You know, that laughter is the one expression that cannot be controlled. You can make somebody afraid. You can even make somebody think they're in love if they're dependent for long enough, but you can't make them laugh if they don't want to. And as a symbol of that to me is that, at least in the Cherokee culture, there is a god of laughter who symbolizes freedom because it is the most free emotion.
so we live in this age, and that people use the phrase like cancel culture, but I've been interested in these, if you could provide us, maybe in your own experience, like part of the challenge I think is, you know, not having public forums or even legal forums for like accountability. When people wrong someone, there's not always a space in which there's that process of accountability and then a public atonement. And so now we're kind of in this like, should people be canceled? Should they not be canceled? What's at stake in that? But it always kind of makes me think, and as a sexual assault survivor and as someone who's really committed to this process of like atonement, and it requires someone who wants to be redeemed to do that work publicly or privately before you have a whole kind of return into the community. It may not be fair, but that's oftentimes missing from our conversation. And you know, in the book, the Color Purple book that I wrote about, of Alice Walker's Color Purple, it was really interesting for me to look at Albert and Alice's imagination, someone based on her grandfather, as a figure who really tries to return to the community, but has to go through a whole process of redemption and atonement. I was curious for you, like, what advice do you have, or are there models in art or in the real world in which you've seen someone really try to atone and redeem themselves, and ultimately, maybe successfully so, but make up for the harm that they've done? Because I feel like that's missing, and I think it would be great for you to just.
Well, The Color Purple is such a great example of it because you forgive Albert and you know, people are allowed to change, and that's crucial. There are programs that try to do that too. I mean, there are programs in which prisoners are encouraged and allowed and supported in going back to the people, the family, the individual, the community, whatever they hurt in committing a crime, and apologizing. And you know, there are programs in which the people who have been hurt visit the prison and visit other. I mean, that's you know, and certainly South Africa was a great example of that, because apartheid was such a huge, obvious sin against human nature, and the people who had been the sinners were encouraged to apologize and welcomed by the people they had sinned against. And that's, you know, that was the ultimate lesson to me.
Yeah, it's just an interesting moment that's kind of been, we're still dealing with Me Too and Black Lives Matter, and how do we have democracy and atonement at the same time. So thank you for that.
You kind of can't have democracy without atonement.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
that's fair. That's true. Well, you are a writer, and one of our great connections is Gloria's also an amazing editor, and I said this to her backstage, and she's like, "Am I?" She's like, you've edited work that I've written about you, and then your forward for my book, and you're just so good on the page. So thank you for all that you've done as a writer and as an editor. And I was curious, what's the piece of writing that you're most proud of? And I know you have a lot of writing, but I'm just curious now that you're looking back, and I know it's not just one thing, but if there's something you could share.
I haven't written it yet.
What? Okay, because that's my next question. So let's just go back to your archive, and is there anything?
No, I mean, I think in a way, a book called Revolution from Within is the closest, because it was so badly reviewed, I can't begin to tell you. The whole idea of internal change as leading to external revolution was just not popular. I mean, somebody said it was like Stalin, you know, leading a bridge club or something. I don't know. I mean, it was... So eventually it came around the other way, but it was extremely painful before it got there, right?
Oh, wow. And so, I mean, because it's such like it comes from the, you know, personal is the political and political is personal. So, but it is interesting. It was Stalin playing bridge. That's what the reviews said?
Something, I don't know, but I mean, it was, yeah, it was, I mean, it was the only time I was compared with Stalin. So.
Yeah. You remember that. And so what's the piece that you would like to write that we haven't had the good fortune to read yet?
Oh, well, that's very tender as a question, because, you know, email is like a disease, don't you think? I mean, it sucks up everything, and it's, right. So, you know, I haven't been able to really get very far with a book of essays as I would like to, so maybe the embarrassment I feel at saying that will help me. This meeting will help me.
Yeah, it's probably not a good question to ask a writer, right? What's the thing they want to write they haven't written yet? But I wanted to know what you were going to say, so thank you for that. And can we play the next clip or the last clip?
Thanks to your generosity of spirit, each of you, in taking time out of your busy lives to take a chance on a stranger. We have something very precious tonight, which is a little time together in this room. So here's my plan. If all goes well, each of us, me included, will leave here with one new fact, one new feeling of support, one new outrageous organizing idea, one new subversive way of making trouble and the creative trouble in our own lives and the world around us, one new way of acting morally. since the art of acting morally is acting as if everything we do matters, and generally to turn this into an organizing meeting.
So if this is an organizing meeting, which it is, and a talking circle, because the two are one and the same, what's the one feeling or the one action, or one feeling and one action that you would like people to leave here with today?
Well, I don't think I can know that. You know, I think each of you knows what is hurtful or unfair, or what your dream is, you know, that you haven't stepped into yet. So, you know, that is something that can't be told to someone else. One thing that I do find helpful, though, is that before you leave, and I don't want you to leave until we have more, right? But anyway, meet 2 or 3 or 4 people you don't know who are sitting around you, and introduce yourselves, say what you care about, and see if you don't leave here with a new revolutionary comrade. I think, you know, it's the tree again, you know, it's realizing that change starts from us right here.
What's something that you would like to take away today? For yourself. You can answer for yourself. You can do that.
When was the last time you danced? No, I think that's, you know, there's something, it's a problem for those of us who work with our heads in whatever way we do, that we forget about our bodies, and we forget what a difference that makes. So I still have my tap dance shoes left over from Toledo, and occasionally I get them out.
That's one of the best video clips of you tap dancing. I don't know if it was like a 60 Minutes interview or something where you're like tap dancing. It's older footage of you, but you were doing an interview and then you like break out into a tap dance.
I don't know. It's embarrassing, but worthwhile to the person who's doing it. Maybe not to the viewer, but right.
And it's the dancing. You always talk about Malcolm X being a phenomenal dancer, which I don't know if everyone knows.
I loved learning that Malcolm X was a all-time great award-winning ballroom dancer. Makes you love him, no? Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to invite Laura to the stage. Where is she? Oh, there she is. Okay. Thank you.
So I know you're both eager to get to everyone's questions, but before we do that, can we please thank one more time Gloria Steinem and Salamishah Tillet? Such an inspiring and I think important conversation, particularly given the moment that we're in, maybe even the moments that we're in. And while we're getting the microphones set up, maybe I'll kick us off. And then if folks have questions, please do come to the microphones. We have 2 of them here. So it's 2023. 100 years ago in 1923, Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman drafted the Equal Rights Amendment with the aim of enshrining full equality into the Constitution. 100 years later, that amendment still has not passed, has not been ratified. And I'm curious whether you think that the ERA is dead or alive.
I think we're the only democracy in the world that does not include all of its citizens, including women, in a very specific way in its constitution and in its democracy. So, you know, it makes no sense at all. And yet the ERA itself sometimes seems to be old or, from another stage of the movement or not radical enough or whatever it is. So I think it's helpful just to look at laws and see what would change if the Equal Rights Amendment were there. Some states have a statewide Equal Rights Amendment, but it's still not the same thing as affecting the federal law.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there has been increasing momentum. At least, at least 4 years ago, I feel like there was this, a desire, a demand, and an increasing energy around state ratification, increasingly new states ratifying it. I think it's, that's why I was trying to get at with the question earlier about these gains and losses happening at the same time. And so what does it mean to have, Vice President Kamala Harris in power and also have the Dobbs opinion? Like, how do we live with these contradictions? And I guess, someone who grew up with Roe as a right, but also the Equal Rights Amendment as an ongoing battle, it kind of makes you, supportive of ERRA, but then also what are the challenges per state? We have new states right now having, what state just? Wyoming, the abortion pill, right? So I don't know. I think it's a really complicated moment. Sorry, this was my time for Gloria. A complicated moment to organize in around.
Well, when you're
feminism.
saying that, one thing I would like to see is that all the airports where people arrive from other countries, all the international airports, to have big billboard kind of highway billboard things that say, "Welcome to the only democracy in the world that does not include women in the Constitution."
Yeah, well, that'd be good. Yeah.
Maybe we could embarrass people into activity.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add the way in which, we've been talking about, you often talk about things being linked and not hierarchical, but the way in which racism and sexism and classism kind of are used against each other to deny one group rights, or so with Dobbs, for example, right? So clearly that's a case in which women's reproductive rights are being restricted, and yet it's an abortion clinic in Jackson, Mississippi that's primarily used by Black women. And so the ways in which I think racism that is working in tandem with sexism doesn't get named as such also harms the feminist movement, and it harms a kind of Black liberation movement. And so I just wanted to add that to the mix, that sometimes when we're talking about women's rights, we also have to constantly be thinking about an anti-racist discourse as part of that too. So.
Well, either it's all women or it's not feminism. Even in the dictionary, it's
So it looks like we have lines of questions, almost as long as the lines to get in, so we better get started. Start over here.
Hello.
So if you could say your name and where you claim, like what part of the world you claim is always nice to.
Thank you. I'm trying to stay calm because you're my hero. But I have kind of a twofold question. Is how has your idea of what feminism is changed from when you're initially on the front lines, 60s and 70s? And also, how do you deal with the fatigue of having fought for the right to abortion and the right to our bodies and having lost it and, in your same lifetime? So how do we deal with that?
I missed the first, what was the first part of your question?
Fatigue. How do you deal with fatigue?
No, the fatigue part.
The first one is how how your idea of what feminism is has changed from the 60s, 70s when you were first sort of advocating for it to now. Mm-hmm. And the second one is how you deal with the fatigue of what we're dealing with now.
Okay. Well, I think because it happened somewhat by accident that I had lived in India for 2 years when I first got out of college. I always thought of feminism as a global movement because the women's movement in India was so huge and influential. At the time, I was trying to write something about Gandhi, and so I went to see a woman named Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, who's a great woman, because she had known Gandhi, and she listened to me patiently, and finally she said, "Well, my dear, we taught him everything he knew." I mean, it turned out that the women's movement, which had preceded and, was the basis of the people marching to the sea for salt, for instance, were women, right? So I think we sometimes render women invisible, or we don't see that it's really all one movement, or, we just make too many compartments. But as long as we keep saying to ourselves, okay, does this group look like the country? Racially, ethnically, and if not, why not? Then I think that's a good reality check.
Thank you.
We'll take one over here.
Hi, my name is Lydia Nobles, and my question is, my artwork was recently removed from Lewis State Clark College in Idaho for being about abortion, and I'm wondering, if you were in my position, how would you respond to this infringement on my free speech and also these laws that are supporting abortion bans?
Well, I'm sorry that your art was removed for that reason. I hope that, since this was probably publicly supported by tax dollars, right?
Yes, they said it was
so
promoting
it was
abortion.
especially outrageous that it was discriminatory towards you. Is there something going forward now that we should know about and we can support?
We're talking to fire.org and seeing if they're going to take our case legally, but outside of that, there's not much we can do. My biggest concern is that the school students are being intimidated into not talking about it.
All right, I don't know if we can unintimidate them across the country, but we'll try, right?
Thank you.
Take one from.
Hi, my name is Rosie, and I'm from Staten Island, and my question is also twofold. So, looking back, who or what would you consider the greatest nemesis you had in the fight towards equality? And in retrospect, your greatest nemesis, and in retrospect, would you approach them differently? And who or what do you think is the current biggest obstacle in our way, and what do you think we need to do to get past that?
Well, it's hard to get past Trump as the worst guy in the right. In some parts of religion, made it very difficult, right? Because it was based on a patriarchal premise, and that was difficult in all kinds of ways, legislatively, personally, individually. But I don't think, I don't have a list of adversaries. It's more like just day by day. And I guess what I would say to my adversaries is, you're missing so much fun. It is so, it is so much more interesting, right? And to be connected and to have this shared purpose and to see people blossoming and to understand that little boys can have dolls and little girls can have trains and all these things. It's just infinitely interesting. You don't know what you're missing.
So I'm always given these really tough jobs, and one of them is going to say that this is our last question. It's up to you.
Hi, my name is Marcia. I'm from Michigan originally, but I live in New York for decades. And Gloria, years ago, we were performing in a theater group at Hill Auditorium in Ann Arbor, and you and Candace Bergen, and that's when I first was inspired and met you. And thank you for that. And also that you were years ago handing out flyers for at Lexington and the subway stop at 77th for Senator Schumer, and I was so inspired that you were out there on the streets doing the work. And I guess, so I feel like, and having bought the first Ms. magazine years ago, I wish I still had it. And so I feel like, are we in our one step forward, one step back? Are we in our step back phase? Because that's the way it feels, and I'm not sure what to do about that, although you've helped answer that today. But second of all, this is a very touchy question for me. When I see the Iranian women burning their hijabs as they're reaching for freedom, and then I see women here in like Dearborn or in America wearing hijabs. I'm not Muslim, but I feel conflicted about that. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think we have to ask the women who are, whether they're in Michigan or in Iran or wherever they are, what we can do to help, because we can't be in that situation ourselves and know what is useful, but we can listen and support and understand this is a worldwide movement. I mean, I was just in Abu Dhabi where there were women from all over the world. And there was a young woman from Afghanistan who had suddenly, how she got herself to Abu Dhabi, I don't know, but she did. And she was the future to me. So it's just about support and encouragement and humor and fun and music and dancing. And, you know, it's not all difficulty. There's a lot of joy in it as well. And are there people here who have announcements of upcoming meetings or actions or anything you want to shout out to this group? Hello?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I mean, with the question, I did want to answer it because I just came back from Sharjah, like on Tuesday. I mean, I do think context matters, so that the revolution that's happening in Iran actually should be and we talked about this, the Women's Media Center, it's the center of our alignment, our alliances, and our support of the families and the young people who are creating radical change, I think, is the basis of the feminist movement. I also think that women, it's about choice, and I think that's the underlying thing. So when it's banned and hijabs are banned in France, that's a different political action that's being used against women's choice. So I just think it's a complicated conversation that varies in context, but I do think your point to center the girls in Iran and the women in Iran, but really we're talking about teenage girls being poisoned and being killed to exercise their freedom and to exercise their agency and to exercise their self-esteem, I think should be what we should be centering on here in the United States as our feminist movement as well. So, yeah, so I just want to add that.
So I want to close by just picking up on something that Salamishah asked earlier. And Gloria, in response to the question about optimism, you said that you have to imagine something before you achieve it. What can we in this room imagine together right now, especially for the very many young people who are here? I mean, I know I'm looking to young people as my hope, my inspiration. It's that there are, the next generations that follow have already proven themselves to be so adept at organizing and speaking, and so I feel like we're looking to them. We have so many young people who are looking to you, to the two of you. What advice would you give them? What should we be imagining together as we walk out of these doors?
I'm would say, don't listen to me. Listen. Listen to yourself. I mean, you know things I could not possibly imagine. You are unique. You are in your own situation. I have faith in you. I love you. We're here to help you. Use all the gatherings you have in your life, including this one, to, meet, as I was saying, 3 or 4 people you don't know before you leave. Say what you care about, what you're doing, what you're raising money for. This is not, a movement is composed of people moving. It's not a hierarchy in which the 2 of us or the 3 of us, can tell you, because we just can't possibly know, except to say that you are each unique, you are a miracle, you can do all kinds of things that I could not even imagine, and you live in the future much longer than I will, even though I plan to live to at least 130.
I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank you for your questions. I want to thank our guests for just an extraordinary conversation. And I want to remind everyone to come back and join us for this evening. Use the QR code to get your ticket. Let's take Gloria's advice. Come back and dance with us this evening. You will have an opportunity to do that. And please join me again in thanking these 2 incredible women.